Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Maj Andrew Chrestman, and I am the IRT Program Manager for the Marine Corps. I hope you're not bored to death or overwhelmed with the volume of information that you've gotten so far, but I think this is a useful brief to look at the lifespan of an IRT project, kind of from soup to nuts. Next slide. Roles and responsibilities. Who's who in the zoo? So you have your program managers that exercise overall oversight of a service component's participation in the IRT program. So that's me for the Marine Corps, along with Staff Sergeant Fleischman. You've probably already had communication with your particular services program manager, and hopefully he or she has been helpful to you in navigating you through the process of applying for a project, and will continue to be helpful in the planning and execution of that project. So essentially we exercise oversight of our services participation in IRT. From there you have, in some services, medical program managers that have oversight over a services participation, all of a services participation in medical missions, and then your CE project managers, which have oversight of a services participation in all of a services participation in engineering projects. From there you have, down to the just individual project level, you have your mission OICs and your mission AOICs. So assuming that a project is joint with multiple services participating, which oftentimes they are, your mission OIC and your mission AOICs are going to be your folks that are in charge. And then down one layer deeper than that, you have your lead unit and unit planning leads that have oversight, or essentially are the leaders of their particular services participation in an individual project. So this is a boring bulleted list. However, the next slide, if you are into pop culture, more into pop culture than I am, and have actually seen The Office, which I will admit, it's kind of depressing that I've never actually watched The Office. This is a gap in my education that is indeed regrettable. But I'm assuming those of you that are listening to this brief have seen The Office and are familiar with it. So this is just kind of a visual representation of the roles and responsibilities that you might see in an IRT project. So I guess we're Steve Carell. I don't even know his character's name in the show, but as program managers, we're Steve Carell, and then we've got Dwight. I do know his name. We'll say Dwight is a medical project manager, and then this other guy whose name I do not know is our CE project manager. The next slide. And underneath Dwight and other dude, you've got your mission OICs for every individual project that Dwight is overseeing, and every other individual project that other dude is overseeing. Next slide. Down to the lower level, you have your mission OICs. Oftentimes they will have assistant OICs, staff NC OICs, NC OICs, etc., which is sort of the leadership structure of an IRT project, assuming it is a larger project with multiple service components participating, which are frankly the best kinds of projects anyway. Next slide. That's your map that just kind of shows, a lot of times, these are not local units that are supporting these projects. You have folks coming from all over, consolidating and congregating in one area at the project site. And so OICs, you have your work cut out for you. There's a lot of moving parts to these projects, but that is also what makes it a lot of fun. Next slide. A little bit of a busy slide here, but it's got a lot of good info. This shows the overall timeline of an IRT project from the time that a community applies all the way through execution of the project and submission of after action reports. Bottom line up front, it's a very long process, 25 months from start to finish. For example, for FY21 projects, the community applications were due September 30th of last year. And then you've already been through the process of looking at those community apps and deciding where you have good training opportunities and you've applied for projects and are excited about executing them in FY21, hopefully as excited as we are at the program manager level. And then right now we're sort of in the process of requesting funding and figuring out how much we want to request from OSD to execute all the projects that we're going to execute in FY21. And then from there you go into the planning and execution, and then the after action activities, which I'll get into in subsequent slides. So next slide. This is a little bit of a deeper dive into the timeline once you reach the planning and execution portion of it. So if you look at it from a fiscal year, like the first quarter of the FY, so October through December, that's typically when we start kicking off the initial planning meetings for these projects. And then January through April is typically when you have your midterm planning meetings and your final planning meetings. Rolling into April through August timeframe is when most of these missions start executing. And of course DV Day is on there because that's an important component of mission execution, which I'll talk about in a little while. Mission complete, and then within 15 to 30 days after mission completion, your after action reports are due. And again, I'll cover that in more detail here shortly. Next slide. So again, initial planning meeting. I have got conference in there because we always have to be different in the Marine Corps. We call them initial planning conferences, or IPCs. So just yet another way we like to try and be different. So again, it typically happens October, November, December timeframe. It usually happens in the location where the mission or the project is going to be executed. Who typically attends? You certainly want to have your mission OIC, any assistant OIC, unit planners, any sort of mission leadership there. You want to have your relevant program managers or project managers from the service component, and then you want to definitely have your community partners there to sort of kick things off. And the considerations that go into this initial planning conference, if you haven't already, you certainly are going to want to identify who's going to take what leadership role assigned by service, get the unit manning document started, and then kind of how the chain of command is going to work amongst the services. An important point: this is not a true joint environment in that there is no AdCon or OpCon over other services. So it's a little bit tricky. As a mission OIC, you do not have command authority necessarily over the other services. So that is kind of a factor that you have to work through in terms of how you're going to execute C2 over a mission. But more on that later. You would definitely want to establish the training goals and objectives by service, and you want to talk with the community partner and make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of scope of work and the training goals. A lot of times there can be competing agendas that's normal, but the planning conference is one of the opportunities that you have to engage in that expectation management with a community partner, and again go over what the goals and objectives of the project are. You're going to want to do site surveys if you hadn't already done a separate site survey. Identify C2 locations, clinic locations, bed down sites, etc. Go over again kind of what the community responsibilities are versus military responsibilities. You've had a brief in the 101, I believe, and maybe some other briefs going over what those general responsibilities are. It's always good to rehash those again as a form of expectation management and ensuring that community and military participants are all on the same page. And then you're going to want to, it's useful to create an action items or RFI tracker. There's a lot of things, questions come up, people make good points, but if you don't track those formally, then they tend to dissipate, and it's good to sort of get those formal planning documents rolling at the IPC. And then, of course, before you kick off, or if you haven't already identified the subsequent planning dates, you're going to want to identify those before you finish the IPC. Next slide, you roll into the mid-planning meeting. Again, generally occurs between January and April. Depends on the mission dates. Some missions execute earlier, some later. It sort of just depends. If you are going to be using equipment organic to the IRT program, a lot of times these mid-planning meetings occur in the where that equipment is stored in Grissom Air Reserve Base up in Indiana. That's not always the case, but oftentimes it is. Who should attend? Again, your leadership folks, unit planners, any equipment site personnel, etc. Planning considerations kind of get into the weeds a little bit more on things like contract deadlines. If you are, contracting for heavy equipment, for example, with a local vendor, I know in the Marine Corps that is a long, onerous process. And it's very deadline driven, so definitely want to get that timeline squared away and make sure everybody's on the same page there. Review your medical logistics, discuss pack out procedures, etc., and then how are you going to account for sign for equipment, Class 8 gear, etc. And then again, how you're gonna prepare the equipment for return once you finish executing that mission. Next slide, on to the final planning conference, the last dress rehearsal before showtime. Typically occurs 45 to 60 days prior to mission execution. Again, that is in the region where the mission is going to be conducted. Kind of same the usual suspects in terms of who should be in attendance, but again, would encourage community partner attendance at this final planning conference, just so that again, it's another opportunity to go over, make sure everybody's on the same page and go over what the scope of work and what the training is going to consist of, and answer any questions and identify any last minute issues. Planning considerations at your FPC, your rehearsal of concept, your rock drills, your walkthroughs. You want to finalize, make sure you're good to go with your transportation plan, all other plans. Public affairs plan is extremely important to highlight, and showcase the good things that all of your folks are doing in these missions. What are the mission reporting requirements? And again, just solidify with the community what it's doing versus what the military is doing. And then it's good to have a letter of instruction or formal guidance that you're going to submit to all your folks with the welcome letter, reporting instructions, what to pack, etc. I want to really have that taken care of by the conclusion of the FPC. Next slide. It's showtime. You've moved on to actual execution of the project. This is not the previous slides and this slide are certainly not prescriptive, like you have to do this and this is exactly how you're supposed to plan and execute a mission. These are just some suggestions and really to kind of get the juices flowing in terms of things that will come up. So again, I mentioned C2 earlier. That can get really complex, especially if you have multiple sites like a lot of the medical missions do. What's that going to look like? What's the C2 structure? Who reports to whom? Where's the C2 site? How's the joint C2 going to work? How's accountability going to work? How's the chain of command going to work? And again, just a reminder that there's no AdCon, OpCon, which makes things a little trickier. What are your reporting requirements, your CCIRs, Commanders Critical Information requirements, your sit reps, your training data, who's going to plug that in. Got to make sure you've got your protocols and procedures, your SOPs for inclement weather, sick call, emergencies. And now in the COVID-19 operating environment now, certainly want to have your COVID-19 plan in place. And then, what's your timeline look like? when is AdVon getting there? When is training day 1? When is the equipment getting there? When do you index? And then when is DV day? That is a very, like I said earlier, a very important part of these projects. A lot of times we have an opportunity to showcase what we're doing in front of very important people, whether it's community leaders, elected officials, military leadership, etc. Again, not an exclusive list, but some good things to keep in mind as you execute these projects. Next slide. After action reports, these are very important. They're due to your program manager within 15 to 30 days following the conclusion of a mission. Every project requires an after action report. It is very important to not wait until the last minute to start compiling. Things will come up. An issue will arise. You'll think of something useful to put on an after action report, a lesson learned in real time, and you would definitely want to log that into the report in real time. It includes the military department funding, what you executed versus what OSD dollars you executed. That's very important. Another unique aspect of an IRT after action report that you'll see is what's the monetary value to the community. That's quantifying what you did, essentially. $250,000 in engineering services provided, or $1 million worth of medical services provided to the community. That's really important. At the program manager and OSD level, so that we can quantify sort of the value of the IRT program as a whole to our communities. And it's also your opportunity to discuss training value, right? So what went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve moving forward? How was your IRT compared to other exercises or other training you've done? How much did it cost you relative to other training you've done? And just sort of be creative in terms of identifying various kinds of training value. We had an active duty unit in the Marine Corps recently submit a report, and they identified just having to work with a community partner in and of itself as a value add. That's, especially on the active duty side, these guys are used to operating in their bubble on a military installation, but when they are forced to train with and contract with and communicate with a community partner, that is a lot more realistic, and is part of what makes IRT such a valuable training option for you and your folks.